same chains, Shaman. Nothing will remain. This means nothing.
Ladies, gentlemen, and necromancers of all ages, maybe you've been playing Necromancer since launch of Last Epoch, maybe you're thinking of picking one up for the first time and you're just checking out what they have on offer, or maybe you're someone who played a lot of it in the early access and thinks they already know Necromancer in and out. Well, today we're going to talk about something totally new to the class in patch 1.0 and showing off the absolutely perfect mid-game build that is using it, and that's the new unique Wraithlord's Harbour, which was added to the game as a reference to David Harbour, who is a celebrity who actually does play Last Epoch. This changes your summon wraith skill to instead summon a Wraithlord, who himself will summon wraiths up to your limit automatically. But once you have that, he actually becomes a ridiculous source of damage himself, firing off necrotic beams of death. There are tons of different ways that you can build around this as a concept, and one that I messed around with was an infinite wraith spawning build where you could have like 15 of them at a time and the Wraithlord would just constantly summon more of them. Well, you just use them as expendable super minions and drained health from them and attached infernal traits, everything like that. It was very cool, but I ran into quite a bit of a survival issue with that build as I was pushing towards unlocking the empowered monoliths, just a little bit below level 80, and so a very large change was made at that point. Instead of using the Wraithlord as a little guy summoner, we use him instead as our main source of damage in the whole build, letting us change our focus significantly, lower the actual inputs required to play the build effectively, which makes you actually have both more mental space for dodging and also build space too for actually getting tankier ourselves. And this is actually really effective, as you rarely have to actually press a button in this game that isn't for movement or dodging. All that said, this is a really fun and extremely effective build that doesn't require anything you can't get relatively easily before level 80, especially with the Merchant's Guild faction if you have a bit of gold and a few ranks of reputation in there, which is fantastic in itself for this mid-game session for most builds. Without further ado then, let's dive into the points that we're putting into each of our specialized skills and what they are, the passive points that we're going with, and why, the gear that you're aiming for within the build, and then just a general how to play it section from anything I've learned myself so far, with a caveat that this is the build that I've been messing around with and testing and pushing to get myself from about level 65 up to level 80 on and off, with this version being by far the most effective one that I've actually had that you can see on screen as well. So I don't yet know how well this will scale into proper endgame, but for the mid-game, even starting as early as you can get the unique helmet for yourself, it should really be quite strong, just because of the small gear requirement to actually get it started. To begin with then, let's talk about the skills and specialization point spending for the build, starting off of course with our main skill of the build, which is going to be Summon Wraith. Here you want to put 1 point into the Locus of Resurrection, 2 points into Haunting for bonus maximum health on our race, then 1 point into Twin Spirits, which limits you to only having 2 wraiths, but no longer decays their health, then 3 points into Sequel of Avarice to increase the size, damage, and health of all wraiths by an excessive amount. Then you want to take the left path over here, taking a full 5 points in Reapers for the extra flat necrotic damage to wraith spells. As the Wraithlord's attack is a fast multi-hit, even small flat damage bonuses have a massive effect when put through all the different multipliers we have on him as well, including Necrotic Hunger, which we just want at 1 rank to start off with. Then you want 1 rank of Wraithbringer over here, mostly just as a gateway to get 1 rank of Spirit Link, which again is a gateway to 2 ranks of Dawn of the Fall for some crit damage least its health, and also some crit chance, but we don't need crit chance for our Wraithlord, as you'll find out soon. So again, this is just a gateway to 3 ranks of Dusk of the Living, giving your wraiths more critical strike damage, a higher critical strike multiplier plus 90%, which is an incredible addition to our damage, as we'll be working out a way to have 100% crit on our Wraithlord just consistently, so this stacks up beautifully. At this point, you will have spent 20 points in your Summon Wraith tree. However, you can get bonus points from different sources. You get 1 by default on the unique helmet that we've been talking about that you'll be using in the build, so you get 1 guaranteed, and you can also at least get a bonus 2 from your chest piece if you get enough of the right affixes actually on it if you get lucky, and you can also use the Merchant's Guild for that too if you want to. For my bonus 3 points, what I've done is put 2 bonus points in Necrotic Hunger over here for extra necrotic damage and health leech, as well as the 1 extra point here just for a little bit of crit damage as leech, but I didn't really need to do that, and instead if you can get just a couple more, I would actually recommend putting them into Grave Reality. This will give you plus 40% health per point that you put into it on your Wraith summons, but it will make them cost more mana to summon and take more time to summon as well, but that doesn't matter because the only one that we are manually summoning is the Wraithlord. He summons the other ones, so realistically you just get the bonuses for health, which actually lets you play around and be a lot more dangerous with your other skill point choices, especially within the specialization of Dreadshade, which we're going to be taking here. And first you want to start off with 2 points into Spectral Presence, which makes Dreadshade affect minions in a larger area. It doesn't matter, it's just a gateway to get Lone Watcher. This makes it no longer drain the health of your minions, instead increasing the damage taken that they have, which won't really affect what we're going to be doing here. It won't matter enough. It also makes it so that you have a maximum of 1 Dreadshade and increases the duration of Dreadshade by 100%, which is pretty fantastic all in itself. Then you want to take 3 ranks of Dying Coven. This increases the cast speed of the affected minion by 24%, which is massive. Cast speed is great. It's basically its own damage multiplier. We want a ton of that for our Wraithlord. Then you just want to grab 1 rank of Duskheart over here, which gives them a 25% chance to apply Damned. This is mostly just for bosses, as applying Damned will give you a stacking necrotic damage over time debuff, as well as reducing the health regen of the enemy that you affect with it. Then you want to go right up back here and put 3 points into Lingering Doom. This will reduce the health decay, which just reduces the damage taken, but also it will give them bonus flat necrotic damage, which is great again. Flat necrotic damage is really important for this build. Then you want to take 1 point in All for One. This makes it so Dreadshade does not buff minions in an aura around it, it only buffs the minion that it's affecting. Again, our Wraithlord is our main source of damage, so we apply Dreadshade to him, and therefore he also gets the 40% damage buff from this with no loss. Then you want to put 1 point into Egoism. This makes it so that your minion that is affected by Dreadshade will always crit. It is 100% guaranteed, but it gives Dreadshade an 18-second cooldown. If you combine that with the fact that we have the actual shade duration increase from Lone Watcher over here, that doesn't really cause a problem for us. You just have to pop Dreadshade every time it runs out, but it still lasts for ages, and it does exactly what we want it to. Too, it generally lasts longer than the cooldown, so it will never actually be on cooldown. This also lets us take Blind Fury, which increases the attack and cast speed of the affected minion by 40%. Again, incredible for a Wraithlord, but it blinds him. What does Blind do then, you might be asking? Blind halves the critical strike chance of the minion and also causes it to aim erratically. The aiming erratically doesn't matter because it will kill everything in 1 hit, and the having the crit chance doesn't matter because we have guaranteed crits. This does not increase your crit chance to 100%. It literally makes you have guaranteed crits. It will not stop you. Then this is where it sort of gets a little bit variation-y. It depends if you want to go for a bit more of a dangerous playstyle, a bit more of an involved playstyle. If you want to need to summon your minions again sometimes a bit more often, maybe you'll put your Dreadshade on cooldown occasionally if it doesn't line up properly, but you want your damage to increase significantly as a result, you would put 1 point into Pernicious Pact. This removes the health decay aspect entirely, but applies everlasting poison each second to the minion that it's affecting, which basically just keeps applying more and more poison damage per second, so eventually the minion just will die. That's just the way it works, which means you will have to resummon your Wraithlord occasionally. But it also lets you put 3 points into Doomed Wraith, which makes an Abomination or Wraith affected by Dreadshade gain up to 45% increased damage with all 3 ranks in here, which is quite a big damage increase in itself. And of course, yes, that does mean that you will have to resummon the Wraithlord, you have to play a bit more actively, and honestly, it does enough damage that at least up until the lower level corrupted timelines, as far as the empowered monoliths, you don't really need to do this portion of extra damage. You will still one-shot pretty much everything without doing that, and it's a lot safer to play without doing that, but that is an option that you have, so I wanted to point it out. Other than that, you want to put the final point in Lingering Doom, just for that more flat necrotic damage, of course, and then your remaining points, regardless of whether you go the offensive or defensive version, will go into Grim Fate. If you've gone the defensive version, you can do all 4. This increases the area of Dreadshade, which again doesn't matter because it doesn't affect other minions anymore, but increases the damage done of the minion that is affected by 60%. Again, a very nice high multiplier. And then if you're just sticking with the lower effort version of the build, then you want to put your last 2 points into Flesh Harvest over here, which increases the effect of all of the Dreadshade buff mechanics for every 3% of missing minion health of the target that is affected. Our minion will be healing a hell of a lot. The Wraithlord has a lot of recovery the way that we set up this build, but this still just does make him do more damage in higher intake situations. Then we want to move on to our 3rd skill. We're moving on to more utility stuff. We've gone over the main basic things for the build, so I'm going to be a little bit less in depth about these things, just try and get through it a bit smoother, a bit quicker, but still explaining every point of it. Infernal Shade, then, we're going to start with 3 points directly into Influence for a 75% increased area of the effect itself. Then we're just going to take literally everything on this right side here. This is all to make the Infernal Shade affect minions. It makes it attach to minions, it makes it damage to minions as well, but it also makes it give haste to the minions, it makes them have more damage that they actually gain from this as well, each second it's attached, It makes the Infernal Shade not have a maximum duration, so it actually lasts the whole time, and it also gives increasing stacking movement speed and cast speed and attack speed buffs to the minion that it's attached to. So if you can attach one to a Wraithlord, the Wraithlord doesn't have health decay anymore, he pretty much regens more damage than he takes. It also has an unlimited duration on it, which means that it will always hit its maximum raising from Manic Pyre, thus making the Wraithlord insanely more powerful than he would be otherwise. After that, you want to put 2 points into Torment Beacon, which gives Infernal Shade a chance to ignite nearby enemies every second, 1 point into Baneful, mostly just as a way to actually unlock Blood Shade, which we put 1 point into here. This changes all of the damage from Infernal Shade into being physical from fire damage. It also changes the Ignite chance into Bleed chance, but mostly, again, we just want this as a gateway to get 4 points into Corrosion. This gives Infernal Shade a chance to shred the armor of nearby enemies every second. All 4 ranks gives us a 200% chance, which means it applies 2 stacks of armor shred every second, which is honestly very, very strong. Then you'll have 2 points left, and here what I've done with those is just put them in Fanning the Flames. This gives Infernal Flames more damage and also an increased area of effect as well. This is mostly for the increased area, as it increases the shredding armor effect range, as obviously the Wraithlord itself is ranged, and so if there's a ranged enemy, this just makes it easier to actually hit them with that effect. Then past that, we're going to be moving on to Transplant, and this is where things get a little bit funky here, because whether you use Transplant actually in general depends on if you have the experimental boot affix that makes traversal skills also teleport minions with you, and you get to get it to at least contain 4 minions on the effect. The 4 minions that would be affected here being the Wraithlord itself, are maximum 2 Wraith summons, and then the Bone minion that we will get from the Transplant skill itself. Instead, if you do not have that experimental affix, what you want to do is instead of running Transplant, you want to run Skeletal Mage and get it all the way over here to the Death's Cavalry perk. This makes it so that you teleport when you summon a Skeletal Mage every 4.5 seconds, and also when you do so, you get 3 minions teleported with you per point in the skill, which is essentially the same effect, but we lose a lot of the utility bonuses from Transplant to get this Skeletal Mages, but it lets you get this earlier on and without specific gear. So if you want to run it without that, this is how you do it. Otherwise, if you have the affix, the ideal way to run it is with Transplant because of all the other goodies you get from this, including our first 3 points into Fleeting Form, which gives it a 15% increased cooldown recovery speed just as a base, as well as 15% increased cast speed, which is just nice in general. Then you want to take 2 points in Anemia to reduce the health cost of using Transplant, 3 points into Bone Armor, which gives you 300 armor and 12% less damage taken for 4 seconds after casting Transplant, which has a 10-second cooldown, so you can't do it every time you transplant, but it still is a nice bit of tankiness every time. As well, we take 3 ranks of Apostasy, which makes Bone Armor last longer by 3 seconds, which makes it 7 seconds out of every 10 seconds, essentially. So 70% of the time you get these bonuses, which are also boosted by Plated Bone, which gives you an extra 20% of the Bone Armor effect. Then we take 1 point in Simulacrum to leave behind a Bone minion, which is a temporary melee minion, and the idea of this is every time you use Transplant, this minion will be instantly eaten by the Wraithlord to make him have his extra flat damage and his extra health, and that way every time you use Transplant, you buff the Wraithlord. If you were to summon minions more often than that, he would eat more often than he should, and therefore he would be wasting his damage output, not setting off beams. But because of the way the timings of this works out, it's actually really just lovely, and it lets you teleport and feed him once every few seconds perfectly while still letting him do a lot of damage in the middle of it. Then you want to take your right path here, which is 3 ranks into Acolyte's Fervor. This makes casting Transplant give you, the player, haste and frenzy for 3 seconds afterwards. This is nice, just gives you some nice movement and cast speed, which is always helpful. Then we take 1 rank in Rain of Blood, which is mostly just to give an actual additional body that detonates when we use Transplant, because the original one is now a Bone minion, but this one will still explode, which is great because then we're taking 2 points into Violent Emergence, which makes Transplant's explosions instantly kill enemies that are below a health threshold, with 2 points in the skill that makes it 10%. So if you use this on a boss per se, where you transplant on top of them, they have 10% less health, they'll just instantly die, and that's the best use of it is for bosses, and that's why we have that skill point there. And then finally we have our final skill specialization, which is going to be Aura of Decay, and you may be saying, how do you have Aura of Decay? That is a Lich skill. Well, the answer for that is we're putting 10 points into the Lich passive tree, which does let us unlock Aura of Decay for use even as a Necromancer. So what we're going to be doing with this is mostly just the point of this right here, Absence of Life. So Aura of Decay makes a poison aura around you, with both poisons you and poisons any enemies that are in the radius as well. This right here is Absence of Life, which heals you for 8% of your missing health per second. So the lower your health is, the more healing you get every single second, which means that no matter what, because of the way that this works, and healing effectiveness on gear is a stat that we're going to be aiming for as well to boost this, we will just be healing more than we'll be losing from the poison. As well, it heals us past that a decent amount, so this is just constant regen that we are focusing to make ourselves significantly tankier, just sort of by default in the way that it works, with the way that it synergizes with endurance, which which we will get to in a little bit too. Then you want to put 4 points into Undertow. This makes Aura of Decay have a chance to slow nearby enemies. That way melee things have less chance of actually hitting you because again, the damage comes from your minions, so most of your job is just running away from stuff. Then we take 3 ranks of Corrosive Aura. If you do feel safe enough to stand near an enemy, this means that they will have minus 120 armor when you do with Aura of Decay active. After that we take 4 ranks of Plague Rat. This makes Aura of Decay affect a much larger area, and then 4 ranks of Respite, which gives you up to 60% poison resistance while Aura of Decay is active, and also gives you 200% increased health regen when it's deactivated for 4 seconds afterwards, which doesn't really matter because we want it permanently active regardless. Then we just have one final point here, so we'll be putting it into Inoculation, just for 5% poison damage taken reduction, just because it's nice to have that as a separate multiplier on our poison damages, and just makes us a little bit tankier in specific instances. That is it for all of our specialized skills then, so let's move on to our actual passive skills. And of course we need to start off with the Acolyte tree itself. Here you're going to be putting 8 points into Bone Aura right here for bonus armor and minion armor as well, then 5 points into Dark Rituals. This gives your minions a pretty notable amount of extra cast and attack speed, which is of course quite useful because again, our Wraithlord wants extra cast speed. Is basically another damage multiplier, just the way that it works. After that you want to put 7 points into Stolen Vitality. This raises your vitality stat, which gives you bonus health and percent poison and necrotic resistance, as well as increases your minion health by a fair amount too. Spending the 20 points that we're at here unlocks this tier right here, which lets us put 1 point into Soul Aegis, giving our minions 3 armor per character level that we have, which is just a really good way of boosting their tankiness and making them live longer. After that you want to put some points into the Necromancer tree, which you'll have unlocked here. Again, we are a Necromancer here, that is our mastery. We have split our points a little bit, but this is our main one. You want to start this off with 8 points into Risen Army. This increases your minion damage in general, but also increases their attack and cast speed. Again, we've gone over how important that is so many times. Then you want 5 points into Cursed Blood, increasing both the necrotic and physical damage of both the player and the minions. And after that, you want to get 8 points into Aegis Fall. This gives your minion attacks 200% armor shred chance. We've been over armor shred chance, we've been over how important that is, and this just means that all minions will shred armor constantly and more frequently, which means the enemies will have their armor reduced even faster, and this is especially good against bosses where you can really stack this up really effectively. After that, you want to actually go to the Lich tree, and here is where we're going to be putting 10 points into Apocrypha, which gives you plus 10 intelligence and a bunch of bonus mana regen as well, and that's the exact amount of points you need to unlock Aura of Decay for use. As well, on top of that, we're going back to Necromancer here, we'll be putting 1 point into Blood Armor, which just gives you a little bit of increased health regen and also your minions a bit of health regen as well. Then 3 points into Mortal Tether for 45% increased minion health. This is the exact amount you need to access this stage of the Necromancer tree, in which we're going to be starting with Frantic Summons for extra cast speed, extra minion cast speed, extra attack speed, and minion attack speed too. Again, really important. And then we're going to be taking 10 ranks directly into Moonlight Pyre. This is bonus flat damage to our Wraithlord. We've been over how important bonus flat damage is. This is a lot of it, so you just take all 10 points of it because it really does add up quite a bit. Then you want to just take 1 point into River of Bones just for the increased minion health leech. Even just at 1 point, that gives you 20% bonus to that, and that is quite a lot for a singular point, and we don't really need more than that. It's just the perfect amount to add to the build. Then you want to take 3 points of Rite of Undeath, which gives you extra elemental and necrotic resistance, as well as extra necrotic and elemental minion damage, which is adding up a lot for us the way that we damage our enemies. After that, you want to take 10 points into Blades of the Forlorn. 2 of these effects don't actually matter for us at all. The one that does is Minion Critical Multiplier. Again, Wraithlord is doing 100% crits all the time, so more multiplier just means more damage. That is a 70% additional damage multiplier from the skill. That's what that translates to. After that, that is pretty much all the points that I have active here. I've also got 8 points in Tyrant for 24% increased health and 24% reduced minion health, but then everything there is everything that I've spent so far. I still have 19 levels left to go, so let's talk about the remaining points that I've got too. And here I've already got 1 point in Veins of Malice, which makes any time that you cast a spell, you give haste and frenzy to your minions for a short duration afterwards. At a full 5 points, this gives you 5 seconds every time you cast Transplant on a 10-second cooldown. So basically 50% of the time, your minions will have both haste and frenzy, which is very good to have. Then after filling out that, we've got 15 points left to go, so we put 7 of those points into filling out the remainder of Rite of Undeath, giving us even more minion necrotic damage and elemental resistances and necrotic resistances for the player themselves. Then we've got 8 points left after that, going back into the Acolyte base tree, all into Forbidden Knowledge, filling up this one completely for some bonus intelligence and more necrotic resistance, just for some better scaling with all of our skills really. With all that covered, then let's go over the gear that you need and the gear that you're just generally aiming for with this build as well. First and foremost is Wraithlord's Harbour, which requires level 65 to be used and is the main linchpin of the build. So generally I don't recommend using the build before you have this, but it is an awesome thing to switch into after your leveling build has run its course. The helmet itself then gives you extra cooldown recovery speed, which is lovely, bonus ranks to summon wraiths for some of the extra pointage that I talked about earlier, bonus minion move speed, and then just flat melee and spell minion damage boosts, which are of course lovely again. Then the unique effect is that Summon Wraith instead makes a big old Wraithlord who summons the wraiths himself. If he reaches your Summon Wraith limit, he stops summoning them and starts just shooting off necrotic laser beams that do high damage, as well as eating any non-wraith minions that you have to give himself a 10-second buff. The other unique that I have is definitely not a requirement, but it is very solid within the build, which is the Death Rattle Amulet. Increased minion damage, increased minion crit chance, which is sadly irrelevant to us, but it does have a nice hefty minion crit strike damage multiplier bonus and some bonus intelligence too for our scaling purposes in general. Past that, most of my build isn't even exalted yet, but I've focused on good stats over subpar exalteds, with the exception mostly being my body armor, which is actually just fantastic, a just nutty amount of minion bonus health and player bonus health too, with +2 to summon wraiths and minion damage for the remainder of my bonus ranks there. For your axe, you specifically want to aim for the Soul Harvester base item. This gives a large percentage of increased minion necrotic damage as an implicit stat, making it even better than a unique such as Reach of the Grave, which is much better earlier in the game, but actually worse than a Soul Harvester if you're doing a necrotic specific build, just because of the amount of the damage bonuses that they give you. On mine, I've got increased necrotic damage and increased mana, but more importantly, I have two different sources of increased flat spell damage, which is absolutely awesome for a Wraithlord focused build. After that, you actually want a shield in your offhand. I know normally you probably wouldn't think of wanting a shield, it's extra defensive and you want to just boost your offense as much as possible, but this build has actually reached a point where your offense is so ridiculously strong that you don't really need help with killing things, at least up to like early corruptions in empowered monolith level of killing things. So if your minions do that much damage, the other things you want to focus on is your movement and your survival. And as far as survival goes, the shield will actually too, just a pretty decent amount to add on to that. Ideally long term, you want a nice high rolled exalted endurance roll on your shield as well, as our main survivability from skills come from increased health regen while at lower health percentages from Aura of Decay, and endurance gives you significant damage reduction below a certain health threshold. So these two things synergize very nicely with each other if we can increase the endurance percentage and threshold whenever possible really within the build. For your rings, you want one opal ring for the increased cooldown recovery speed to make transplant more frequently available to you, then one turquoise ring for the minion damage and minion health as well. And on these you mainly want things like bonus minion damage, bonus minion health, player health, endurance threshold, or healing effectiveness, as is the same for most of your other gear honestly. With the last very specific things that I want to point out being your boots. I did mention this earlier, but to use transplant properly within this build, you need the experimental minion teleport traversal skill at the rank where it affects 4 minions. Then the rest of these I'm just quite happy with in general, as my boot stats, tons of movement speed, good armor and health bonuses as well. And then after that we have our idol slots as well. The main ones that are very important to keep an eye out for are these 2 adorned immortal idols that I have here. Their main purpose is giving us a high chance to create flame wraiths instead of regular ones. Even without taking the flame wraith skills in the point tree, we can make them summon through these just naturally. This will not apply to the Wraithlord himself, he can never be a flame wraith, but it does to apply to the 2 wraiths that he creates. And ideally, we do want flame wraiths over regular ones in those slots so that they stay at a distance, firing armor shredding shots out of danger. The less danger the little wraiths are in, the less often they will die, which means the less time the Wraithlord spends creating new wraiths instead of firing off necrotic damage blasts. Ideally, you want marked for death application chance on some of your idols as well, just for the resistance drop debuff, especially for bosses. Then generally speaking, your idols can just be tiny little helpful defense or offensive bonuses, things like health percentage, flat health, endurance and endurance threshold, even things like bonus mini necrotic damage does also have an effect as well, and is pretty nice to have too. And that pretty much does it then for actually creating the build then, everyone, so let's talk about actually playing it for yourself. When you enter a new area or load into a monolith, you want to create your Wraithlord. He will create little wraiths when you actually get close to an enemy, but you want to put both Dread and Infernal Shade on the Lord first. They will last an extremely long time as long as you stay mobile. Then you want to activate Aura of Decay on your player and transplant towards some enemies as your traversal skill. If your Wraithlord creates non-flame wraiths, you can click out over on Aura of Decay and activate Sacrifice on your bar instead. Because Aura of Decay is active within the instance that you're in, you can actually get a bit silly with it and use this as a bonus slot for a non-specialized skill, because the only time that you would need Aura of Decay back on your bar is to deactivate it. In this case, we'll be using Sacrifice as its replacement to insta-kill the non-flame wraiths and replace them with the ideal friends when the Wraithlord makes the right ones. This build doesn't require you to have flame wraiths by any means, they just make it a few percentage points better here more than not having them really, but essentially the goal is just to have Aura of Decay on permanently with enough healing effectiveness, affixes on our gear to make it a net positive regeneration, make sure Infernal and Dread Shade stay on the Wraithlord as our main source of damage, and then you just want to transplant teleport yourself into piles of enemies and run around avoiding the attacks that they do, while the minions do all the actual damage. Bosses are pretty much the same too. It just lets you really focus on avoiding mechanics and learning the attacks of bosses if you want to, or even just lets you tank them. If you want to show the tankiness of the build like this, you can even let a tri-beam hit you in the footage in the face for a couple of seconds if you want. It doesn't really stop you as much as you might be worried about, honestly. All in all, this is a great mid-game build in my opinion. I don't know personally how this will scale into proper endgame and endgame gear, but it is absolutely phenomenal from level 65 up to the start of Empowered Monoliths, where I'm just about at the very least. It's very fun, it's very much a simple playstyle, it isn't hard. Essentially, the only active button in the defensive version of it, at least, is Transplant, so you're realistically just focused fully on your player movement, while the rest of the stuff just sort of happens naturally, which is truly a beautiful thing to have as a Necromancer. I mean, that sort of is the class fantasy, right? I hope you all enjoyed this then, and hopefully you enjoy the build yourself if you try it out in game. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.